Yeah. So the first question, Perry, is who was Laura Perls to you? What was your experience of her?
Yeah. Well, I guess my experience is formed over a number of years, many years actually. When I first got involved with the New York Institute, she was part of all the presentations, but she was a very quiet figure, and I didn't begin my studies with her at all. Um, I began them with a number of her um, uh, clients and students. Uh, so that there was Pat Kelly, Richard Kitzler, and then and then in that sequence, after about 5 years, I worked my way up to working with Laura and to being in a group with her for 2 years. And uh, that was an opportunity to get to know her and to appreciate her perspective and her approach. Before that, she would chair the New York Institute meetings and was always a quiet figure. Um, she would, at various meetings, say a couple of things, usually a thought that summarized or made a point about something, contact experience, what's happening, and for the most part, not um, um, very outspoken or aggressive, presenting, taking up a whole meeting. She was more in the background. And some meetings she might not attend, but she was mostly there as an important figure at the New York Institute. Everyone um, there at that time in the mid 70s had either been a client or was mostly a client or a student of Laura's. So I got to know her over time, and I got to know her as having a different viewpoint and approach to Gestalt therapy, different than Kitzler or Pat Kelly or Isidore Fromm. And I think I did Isidore's work with Isidore concurrently with Laura's group or immediately after. I'm forgetting the sequence actually. Um, but with Laura, I got to learn not so much an approach to Gestalt therapy, and as one of an available other and a person to be in contact with, have an experience with. So in the 2 years that I did group with Laura, um, I got to work with her and observe her work with others, and and um, then the group I did came to a close, and then I got to know Laura over the next 10, 15 years as a member of the Institute and sharing times at meetings and nice walks with her home around the corner from where the meetings were, and getting to know her as a strong person, an available person, a thoughtful person, sensitive person, with a particular view of Gestalt therapy in terms of making contact. She emphasized support. She emphasized working on the surface, what's available and immediate.
Okay. Yeah, I was interested in that phrase as an available other. When you
Uh-huh.
say you came to know her as an available other, that was interesting. So, when you have had these experiences in her group and then getting to know her, what was your experience of her? Do you have any particular moments that come to mind that have stayed with you, either with her personally or in your work?
Um, There was one instance where we were then a very small group. It was just before the group ended, and there was a very wonderful movement therapist who was doing some work, and it was about her pregnancy, and I was experiencing some impatience, and Laura worked with me on my impatience and my wanting to see work done, and helped me examine the subtlety of work. And that left a lasting memory for me of the existential is something that we discover in the moment, and we meet it. We don't push it around, and we're available to it, to use that word again. So that left me with a sensitivity to being open to the mystery of the other and their organizing process, and having important meaning I want to be open to appreciating, understanding, and being curious about.
Hmm.
So that was very nice for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it left me with an element of my ongoing approach.
Okay. Do you want to say more about that, perhaps, about how Laura may have influenced you in your own work?
Um, well, the pieces that, she left me with two impressions. The impression about three: support, contact, um, and working at the surface, working at what's immediately um, visible, hearable, um, sensing, and to be responsive to that. So that is very much an aspect of my work when I am with someone. Um, and something that she also impressed me with, that contact is a relationship, that contact is the experience of relationship. And so we can do that we can be at the boundary with someone that way, with what the sensory qualities are, the aesthetic qualities of the relationship. I feel close to you now. I feel distant from you now. I feel this in me, an impatience with me even. I feel this or that, whatever. There's a style of her work that is very much that way.
Mm-hmm.
In my own learning process with Isidore and Kitzler, they were, in their own ways, they were experiential, no question, but they were also very theoretical. And Laura's theory was not presented in detailed, complex ways. Hers was very immediate and simple language. Uh, and I think I like that very much about how she worked, and and learned some of that from her.
How do you think she understood this work? Would it be, I mean, do you think that she imagined where this would be going?
Oh, um, oh, you make me wonder whether she did have an imagining. I somehow think she wouldn't have imagined where it would go. Um, and I think my fantasy is she would take some exception to some of how we talk about Gestalt therapy these days. Um, uh, but I don't think she would go off. She would say it's going to be what it is, and it's going to be different. And as she said, Gestalt therapy is different for every Gestalt therapist. Um, but I think I'm not sure whether this is her talking or me talking. Um, that she would always see, I think, or she would, I think she would say that she would, and it said, Kitzler points it out in his book, that she always saw contact as a relationship, as always an interaction of self and other. And uh, so I think she might not think that some of the stuff we talk about today, we're doing relational Gestalt therapy, as different than what she did.
I'm wondering what else comes to mind if you start sort of shaking the Laura parts loose a bit. Anything
Well,
else pop up?
something that comes up for me is in her own way how she was integral to the New York Institute for the period. I would even go back before Fritz distanced himself. I would go back to the 50s because it strikes me that Fritz and Paul Goodman were both very active in going their own ways and having lots of new, interesting things to think about and do. But she was a consistent therapist and was there, and she trained and was therapist for Isidor Fromm, Richard Kitzler, and then a slew of other therapists who were prominent at the New York Institute, names that you and others might not recognize, like Jean Greggs and Paul Oliver and Doug Davidoff, and I'm sure there are a couple more that became fellows of the Institute in the 60s. And similar to all the therapists I know now, um, she was consistently a therapist and a teacher. Um, I've been a therapist now for something like 40 years, and different than Fritz or Paul, who wrote Gestalt Therapy PhD that I like so much, and then moved on to other and different pastors. Laura was right there. She was consistent. She was home base. And the people who were active at the New York Institute always were the vice president. She was the honorary president. And she was a consistent base for the New York Institute to organize around. And many of the people who persisted in the New York Institute to this day were students of those people. Uh, and so she was a very strong organizing force, much different than Goodman and Fritz. So I think that really stands uh, to her credit. She was in her training, her European classical training in the arts and literature. She brought a perspective that was different than the more American perspective, that's a little more limited in scope, I think, especially after. So, but I think that um, uh, so I think she brought special qualities to the New York Institute and to the training of the therapists who arose in the New York Institute that are excellent or very good and sustaining qualities. Contact, support, uh, what's novel, the creative process, being assertive and aggressive with the place of knowing and not knowing. there was one presentation that was on videos, and that's why I remember it. I don't have good long-term memory. I don't, it's even shorter than long. But she did a presentation at the New York Institute, and two things stand out now. One was that presentation. It was in the mid 80s, and she was getting older and slower, but she had a very nice command of her situations. And I think uh, it reminds me of my grandmother who came from Hungary, who also had a very straight bearing, like Hitler has a straight, very erect bearing. And she would look at people, and you'd feel um, her gaze as powerful. I would feel her gaze as powerful, and I think everyone else did too. And in her silence was a certain expression of I'm here, I have something to say, and I'm available for your response. So that was really um, very fine and distinguishing quality of Laura that isn't particularly commonplace. I think it comes out of her coming out of a time when that was part of the culture she grew up in. And it's European, I think it's European in style, but it's even dated back to the 40s and 50s and 60s. And if you think of Fritz Perls and Isidore and Kitzer, they also had some of a particular cultural uh, uh, character that they contributed to how they made their presence known. And she had that too. And I'm sure Fritz did. I would also comment that she didn't do that much writing, but she's written a number of things. And they're generally short pieces. Um, one is about giving and receiving. And uh, she was a, a very good writer and a thoughtful, insightful person. And she did that analysis very excellently. And the other was the article that I like very much, The Woman in the Dunes, where she does an analysis. And I think that's in Bud Feeder's and Ruth Ronell's book on the living legacy. I'm not sure. I think it's there. But in The Woman in the Dunes, she is talking existentially about the issue of acceptance. And that reflects another contribution of Laura. Sorry for interrupting, but I'll come right back. Is what is Gestalt therapy? And one of the definitions she used was it's experiential, existential, and aesthetic. And that always stayed with me and always oriented me. And it was concise enough and extensive enough that it really also stayed with me as a piece of learning from her. And The Woman in the Dunes is a story about, you know that story? It's a story of a man is shipwrecked and he ends up on this land. And there's a ladder that goes up to cliffs or something. And he climbs the ladder, and at the top, on this mountaintop that he can't get off of, is a woman who lives there. And the villagers, some reason, want this woman to not be alone, and they take away the ladder. And the man has to deal with what it means to have no choice and accepting the conditions of our lives. And as a story, as you might guess, I think there are various versions of this. There's a Japanese version. He falls in love with her, and they make a life. And he's finally offered the ladder back, and he refuses to take it. And Laura makes in her description an analysis about um, the accepting the conditions with which we live. And that has philosophic roots in the in both going from Aristotle to Heidegger about living to our potential and the full of the fulfillment of that. And in acceptance, this man fills out his potential to be in the world with life and love. And it's a lesson about that. I think Gestalt therapy in its holistic orientation attempts as part of the value of Gestalt therapy, of the Gestalt, of the unity of figure and ground, of subject and object, of ourselves in the world, and how that is indivisible. So I very much liked, because intimacy has always been an interest of mine, that in her delving into that building of a relationship, the into me see of it, and her analyzing the conditions of experience which this man had, that the very lovely presentation there. So I carry that with me. I carry, actually, that I haven't thought of that. I carry that with me as a sustaining value, both in Gestalt therapy and in my own life. And I think because she wrote it, it has had a special meaning to me, and the points she makes in it, I think, are wonderful. Yeah, good.
Now I'm gonna have to go find that and read it. I'm curious
Check,
about.
check out The Living Legacy, Bud Feeder,
Mhm,
and her writing of it, I think, is different than other presentations.
mhm,
I liked it very much.
mhm.
I'm glad that we had this opportunity to speak. I didn't know what I would say about Laura. Um, and I'm glad to discover that in saying this to you, I feel a renewal of the meaning of these events and Laura to me. And that's nice as well.
Well, thank you.
And I'm glad I have the opportunity to say this to you,
I
because
appreciate it.
thank you for, in a way, suggesting this, because you've given me the opportunity to go through this as well. So thank you for creating this with me.
Yeah, thank you.